but I'm already doing so much emotional work. Is this something that you believe and that you tell yourself? Well, let's stop the story. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel I give you relationship tips, attachment style healing strategies, and other tips and strategies for living your best life and having wonderful relationships. And I am open to one-on-one coaching. You can look below in the description box for a free 20-minute consultation to see if that would be right for you, or I might be able to point you in another direction as well. In any case, today is part of this series of short videos called Stop the Story, where I would talk a little bit about, things that we tell ourselves that really are not the full picture, that are essentially a story we're telling ourselves, and that, if we could lose them, would actually help us on our way towards, getting into change and real change faster. So today I want to talk about the story, but I'm already doing so much emotional work. And sometimes that looks like I'm doing all the emotional work, like if it's about a relationship. And so I won't get into the pieces about like what you might be seeing or not seeing that someone else is doing. Let's focus just on today on this piece of feeling like you are fully doing the emotional work, but maybe nothing's changing. So why isn't it? So I'm not saying that you're not necessarily doing any work. Maybe you're working on trauma. Maybe you're doing EMDR therapy, but in other areas and so it feels like, of course, that you're doing a lot of work. You are doing a lot of work, but there's some other areas of your life that things aren't changing in. So it could look more nuanced than just you think you're doing work and you're not. But I want to cover the pieces that are more the story pieces about when we tell ourselves, oh, we're already doing so much emotional work. We're already doing all the emotional work is the implication, right? When maybe that's not really the case, that we're doing all of the work to change. So I'm just going to cover this by talking about 3 ways that this might look and what sort of is the kind of underlying bigger truth to each one of them. Okay, so my first example of how it might look is that maybe in a relationship, for example, you are always the one to notice that there is a problem. And so you're the one who's saying, okay, we need to have a talk. This isn't working, or however that looks, you're the one who seems to be noticing, right? So of course that goes along with, which is, there's truth too, that you'd be the one doing the emotional labor. And so that can really feed into that story of, that's my part of the work. I noticed the thing. I'm the one noticing it. But what's the full truth there? The full truth really comes with a question, which is, are you really understanding the underlying cause? It's great to notice there's something wrong, but sometimes we're not actually correct about what the problem is, which is why it often looks like we think there's something that the other person's doing wrong, right? But even if we're starting to see our own place in it, without doing some deeper work, we may not realize what's really going on. So let's say, for example, that it's a communication problem with a partner, since I mentioned it as something we're bringing up in a relationship. And we just keep bringing it up. Like maybe even we're starting to communicate and then we say, we just can't ever communicate. This communication's not working. Well, until we understand something, like I'm going to use for this example that maybe the underlying cause is that each person's always triggering each other. And until we understand that, then it's not really doing the full work, right? So sure, it's an important piece to be bringing it up and sort of realize there's a problem and, have our mind on it a bit, on attention on it. But it's not like we've done all the work just because of that. So the deeper investigation there would involve starting to really notice and acknowledge each other's trigger patterns, to understand more about them, and that's really hard to control. It's coming from our background, and it's very difficult to control a trigger. So it's the other person's responsibility as well to interact. It's both people's responsibility, right? Like if you're triggered, to let someone know if you're able to. But as part of being a communicator who's trying to have effective communication, it's also important to be mindful of that. Like if something's going to trigger your partner and you're starting to understand that, then you would try to preface it, you would try to be gentler, you may say it differently. And so all of that is really valid. And so that's a very specific example to help you understand what I'm getting at here. But hopefully that helps you see how just being the one to bring up a problem isn't going far enough. That's not like your work is done there, right? So that story of I'm doing all the emotional work could very well actually be holding you back then in that case. All right, another way, a second way that it can look when we're telling ourselves the story, I'm doing I'm doing all the emotional work, and I don't necessarily mean doing all the emotional work as opposed to another person, but like if you just feel like, things aren't changing for some reason, for some mysterious reason, but you feel like, but I'm doing the work. The other way that that can look is the emotions, right? So if you're actually allowing yourself to feel lots of emotions and you're, let's say, um, noticing that you feel sad, or if you're noticing that you're annoyed and starting to work with your anger. So you might feel like, oh, well, here I am feeling all my emotions. And of course, that's important, right? It's important not to suppress them. But if you're telling yourself then, I'm either the emotional one and the other person isn't, or you're just feeling, very emotional and acknowledging that and noticing it, that still doesn't mean that there isn't something underlying there, right? That you also, besides not suppressing your emotions, that also doesn't need to be investigated and worked with and the healing and change journey. So how might that look? So let's say it very well might look like core wounds, for example, or limiting beliefs that are being activated that you don't even realize are being activated. So yes, it's wonderful not to suppress your emotions, but if they're being caused by a core wound that's, for example, telling you that you're not worthy or that you'll be abandoned. And so let's say in the case of being not worthy, maybe you're feeling sad all the time because you have this core wound that you're not worthy, and then so you have this lens of that, and you're then you feel like all the evidence is coming at you because you have that lens that's telling you you're not worthy. I mean, then of course you're going to feel sad. So it's not about suppressing the sadness, but it could be that that core wound is causing that. Or like in the case of feeling like you're going to be abandoned, that if that's making you anxious, it's important to understand that there's that underlying root cause, right? So it's not enough just to feel the emotions. And it's almost hard for me to say that because, of course, we've come such a long way in wanting people to actually feel their emotions and not suppress them. So that's very, very important. But if you're telling yourself, I'm feeling so many feelings, and then making it that I'm doing all the emotional work, I'm doing everything, that can actually end up being a barrier towards some deeper work that also needs to be done. All right, the third example sort of dovetails a little with the first one, actually, because it's around communication. So maybe you feel like you are the person who always communicates with others. So that could look like in a relationship being the one to bring up the challenges, like I mentioned in the first example. But maybe it's just in other ways. Maybe you're someone who is more like trying to advocate, in every relationship that you have. And so that's wonderful, of course, right? That's an important thing to do. But if you're telling yourself, well, I'm always advocating, I'm always communicating, but you're having still struggles or challenges in that communication or in getting what you were hoping to get from the advocacy, there's still something more going on, right? And so it's important to see that and stop the story that you're already there when you're not. And so in this case, kind of dovetailing with number one, it could look like understanding better communication with that specific person, like if they're getting triggered or they're not understanding what you mean. But it also might look more like my number two example, in that maybe it's that you aren't actually understanding as fully what it is that you're wanting to advocate for, what you're wanting to ask for. So, for example, maybe you're asking for something, but you really have an underlying need that's more important, but still subconscious to you. And that you need to sort of uncover that, like, oh, this is what I'm really asking for. This is what I really want, right? So that's one way that it could look. If your way of telling yourself the story, I'm already doing all the work or all the emotional work, has to do with being a communicator. So hopefully those examples help you to see how that story can both come up in our lives, that we're doing so much work, like as if we're all the way there already with our change and healing journey. And also how it can be a barrier to actually taking those next or perhaps deeper steps in our healing and change. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'd also love to hear if you have any ideas for future topics for videos. And thank you so much for watching.